Hi everybody. Thanks again for joining us in today's webinar titled Nintex Workflow Expert Design Techniques for the Enterprise. I'm Shruti Shukla. I work as a Product Marketing Manager at Nintex. And with me today I have Rob Pratt, our Global Training Partner from Combined Knowledge. How are you doing, Rob?
I'm very well, thank you.
Great. So today I'll be taking you through a lot of exciting features, and Rob, who's an expert in Nintex workflow technology, will join me here to explain to you how these work and also provide some very good examples of why customers are using them and how are they actually applied in the business scenarios. We often receive the question from customers asking us what's in Enterprise Edition, or how do you differentiate between Enterprise and the standard version of Nintex Workflow. Now, one way to answer the question is to list out all the features that are specifically unique to Enterprise Edition. But that really does not explain much to our customers. It's okay to talk about the features, but it's more important to understand what you can do with these features. So a better way to answer the question is to break it into chunks. There are really three things that make Enterprise Edition special. Three things that you need to remember. The first one is what I call product integration. And what I mean by this is in the standard edition of Nintex, you do have integration, but at the protocol level. So you have the ability to enable softwares to talk back and forth. But that requires a fair amount of understanding of the data, understanding of the services that you will need to build and configure these workflows and establish all these connections. What we do with Enterprise Edition is make it a lot easier for all of you. All you have to do is drag and drop a ready-to-use action that's already a perfect fit. And having worked over a decade-long journey with a number of customers and partners, we understand what products you're most likely to integrate with. So, in a nutshell, if you want to play around with the protocols, Standard Edition is a good enough SKU. But if you really want to get support for specific products, that is what Enterprise Edition helps you with. Moving on to the next main categorization, it's called provisioning, and it's also a form of integration, but it's a special kind of integration. When I talked about integration before, I was talking about being able to use services. With provisioning, you can do much more. You can not just use, but also manage these services. You can control other parts of SharePoint. You can manage your audiences. A very good example for this would be when an employee is onboarding your company, you can provision collections and sites. You can provision stuff like accounts, mailboxes, group memberships, and real-time communication privileges. So this is another second big chunk of additional value that is offered as a part of Enterprise. And then the last part, and to my mind, my favorite part, is information. We collect a lot of data while running these workflows, and there are a lot of things that you can do with the data that we collect. I will talk about, say, just 3 examples of what you can do with this information. And mind you, there's so much more, but I'll just keep it short with 3. The first one is around being able to improve your processes. When you're collecting this data, you're able to identify patterns and trends and leverage these insights to overall improve and make your processes efficient across organizations. Another example would be looking at user adoption, understanding how the users are using this technology. You've invested in it. It's probably a good idea to get a sense of how much it's being used, who's using it, and in what capacity. And then a third big deal and a third example of information would be to find out till what extent is workflow using resources. So we're talking about resource utilization here. Are you able to keep up with the loads? Can you answer questions like whether there are bottlenecks? If there are, where do they exist? Do you need to reconfigure your SharePoint to accommodate more workflow activity? So all of these questions and much more is something that you can leverage from the information that we are providing to you via all the activity that is being logged after running the workflows. So to sum it all up, if you need to remember something about Enterprise, it is these 3 words. It is all about integration, it is all about provisioning, and it's all about information. Now that I have covered what's in the Enterprise Edition, I'd like to hand it over to Rob to walk us through what you can do with Enterprise Edition. I know I've covered a lot of features, but it's really what you do with these features that counts. So in the next few slides, Rob has two very nice examples. The first one being around using Excel services and using these to perform complex calculations to solve real-world problems. And once Rob walks us through that example, he'll take us through another example, which is around featuring business data connectivity and business connectivity services and how they help in building data-driven processes. So at this point, Rob, I'd let you take the control, and it probably would just take a moment for us to see Rob's screen.
That's great, thank you. So thank you for the introduction. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here as well. I'm going to spend most of my time in a demonstration environment, so that's where we'll begin. So the first part that we're going to work with today of Nintex Workflow is showing you how you can make use of your existing Excel skills. So it's quite likely that a lot of you within your different departments are already using Excel spreadsheets. One of the things that might not have occurred to you is that you can use those same Excel spreadsheets within a workflow. So this is actually one of the key things that people are buying the Enterprise Edition of Nintex Workflow to do. So it's a key area of interest. Having said that, there's a whole load of people out there that have never bothered to really dig deep enough to get it working. So what we're going to do over the next 20 minutes or so is we're going to show you how you can actually take an Excel spreadsheet and you can make use of the logic of Excel within an Nintex workflow. So the scenario that we're going to run through is pretty typical of what you would see in a lot of offices around the world. The idea here is I'm a salesperson. When I'm looking to offer someone a price for a product, I use an Excel spreadsheet to help me calculate if I'm going to make a profit or a loss on that deal. So early stages of a deal, I'm looking to calculate, is this a good deal or a bad deal from my point of view? So this Excel spreadsheet is made up of all sorts of tables of information to do with prices for deliveries, previous history of sales prices, unit prices for a specific product, and also calculations based on quantity of sales. So it's pretty typical of the sort of thing we'd see in a sales estimate spreadsheet. So what I've got here, if I just show it working directly, is I can type in something like a price, a quantity, a location that I'm delivering to, and a product. And what happens is, the key thing that I'm looking for down here is these two figures. So there's a figure that tells me if this is too cheap or if it's acceptable. That's based on the history of recent sales. So basically it's actually looking at what other salespeople have been doing, what have they been selling coats for, what was their prices. It tells me here if I'm actually lower than the lowest price so far. Also the spreadsheet is telling me if I'm likely to make a profit on this. So depending on where I'm delivering things to will affect my profit as well as the volume and the product. So behind the scenes there's quite a lot going on in this spreadsheet. So having already said that we've got this spreadsheet, what we want to do now is show you how we can make Nintex Workflow make use of this spreadsheet. So if I drop back out of here just for a moment, let me show you how I'd go about building a workflow to make use of that. So over here in SharePoint, which we all know is the center of the world, what I've done is I've already uploaded a copy of that Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so I'm in a normal document library in SharePoint 2013, and I've uploaded a spreadsheet. This would actually also work in SharePoint 2010, and actually there was something pretty similar in 2007 as well. So I see there's a question about which version this will work in. This works almost exactly the same in 2010 SharePoint. So what I want to do to make the process a bit more streamlined and a bit easier for the salespeople is I'm going to make it so that when they add a new item into this list over here, so when they type in what they're selling, where they want it to go to, the quantity they need, and the unit price, what's going to happen is a workflow is going to pass this information into the Excel spreadsheet for them. The Excel spreadsheet will calculate the answers, and it's going to come back and it's going to fill in these results. So one of the benefits of that is that quite often when people use Excel spreadsheets, they accidentally change them. So imagine all the different salespeople around our company all using slightly different versions of these estimate spreadsheets. So there's a lot of value in getting that spreadsheet, having it on a central server, and actually having no one directly going into the spreadsheet. So this system can pass information into the spreadsheet. allow it to calculate and then retrieve the results. So that's what we're going to do. One of the reasons that I think a lot of people should be kind of excited about this is because we've got these Excel spreadsheets already, and this is going to be a process where you can often take those existing spreadsheets and build them into a more streamlined, automated process. So this is a real quick win. Okay. Before I go ahead and just start building, what I'm going to do is just show you, first of all, the requirements that I've already met to be able to do this. Okay, so there's a few things that need to be in place before you can go ahead. So the first thing is I need SharePoint Excel services to be switched on. So that's actually functionality within SharePoint that needs to be enabled and configured correctly so that I can build workflows to make use of that. So if you're not a server person, you need to check back in your organization that that's enabled before you start building this type of workflow. The next thing you'll need is an Excel spreadsheet or a workbook. The key thing is it needs to have formulas, so things like ifs, VLOOKUPs, is error, database functions. So that's the sort of thing that this is perfect for. Spreadsheets with hundreds or thousands of formulas, maybe millions of formulas in some cases. This can process those and bring back the results. Just before we get to the good stuff, just to confirm what this won't do, this process will not run macros, and it also won't run Excel goal seek. So if those are things that you need within an Excel spreadsheet, that particular spreadsheet won't work for this. Okay, so this is really spreadsheets that are just pure formula and function based. So things like if and VLOOKUP and is error. So that's what I've got lots of within my spreadsheet. Okay, I also need a SharePoint library which is going to hold the spreadsheet. I've already got that. And I also need the Enterprise edition of Nintex Workflow. So this is one of those luxury features that's only available with Enterprise. Okay, so that's what I'm going to work with. So, so that's all of the groundwork out of the way. To be honest, that's probably the hardest bit, just understanding what we're trying to achieve. So the process will be I'm going to fill in an item and it's going to return the data. So the interesting bit, for those of you that have joined the session today, is these expert tips that we're going to share with you along the way. Not just how to quickly build this workflow, but lots of tips and tricks to make your life a bit easier when you're building any workflow. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the action that we're really interested in for this demo, and there's one in here called Query Excel Services. Okay, so this is the one that's going to go to Excel, bring back the results. It's going to do all the work. So we'll get this one working first, and then I'll build out the rest of the workflow. Okay, so if I run down here really from top to bottom, the URL is filled in already, so that's perfect. The next thing it wants from me is a user that has authority to talk to that spreadsheet. So I've got a user account that I've got set up already called Alex. That's my kind of dummy account that I do all my testing with. The next thing it wants is a workbook path. It wants to know where's the Excel spreadsheet that we're going to pass values into. So what I'm going to do is just go Control and N for new on my keyboard. That's going to bring me up a second window, a second session in Internet Explorer at the address that I was already at. So just a quick way of getting back to there. I can then drop back out of there, and what I need to do is just grab the address of this spreadsheet. One of the things that's kind of nice about SharePoint 2013 is it's actually quite easy to grab the address of any file, so you can just copy it right out of here. You would have to do something similar to grab that out of 2010, but not quite so easy. So if I minimize that, so one of the things I'm doing there is I'm not getting too hung up on memorizing the names of files or the addresses that files live in. I'm just going to go and open a new window. If I need to check something, I'm going to fire up a new window. There's no shame in that. The next thing I need is the name of the sheet. It's kind of saying where are you going to pass the data into. So at the moment, I believe it's sheet 1. So I'm not checking that. I'm kind of half confident there. So I believe it's sheet 1. If we get an error in a moment, that will be one of the first things I'll be checking. Okay. So there's kind of things I'm confident in because I've copied and pasted them, and there's things that I'm less confident in because I've typed them. So those are good places to come to when you get an error, the things you've typed and you've not double checked. So that'll be an easy start. The next thing we need to do is tell it which data we want to pass into the spreadsheet. If I just open the spreadsheet back up again for a moment, just because I only flashed that open for a second before, let me just show you that there's 4 values that need to get passed into the spreadsheet. So in C4, I'm going to pass in a price per unit. In C5, there's going to be an order quantity. In C6, there's going to be a location. And then finally, in C7, there's going to be the product name. So those are the things I'm going to pass in. So I'll tell it about those in a moment. Effectively, what I'm going to do is connect the form in my SharePoint list to these fields within Excel. So it's not going to be exactly that, but that's the thing we're trying to create, the relationship between those two sets of data. At the end of this exercise, I'm also going to grab these two results. So this is where it's telling me if it's too cheap, and this is where it's telling me the profit and loss. So those are the two cells that I'm going to grab back out of there. I could grab more, but for the 45 minutes we've got left, 2 should be plenty for us. So let's just drop back out of there. I have made a quick note of the cells that I'm going to work with, just because I couldn't remember them last time. So the first cell was C4. Okay, so I'm telling it it's sorry, my mistake. I need to go add cell to update and put C4. So this is the values I'm passing in. C4 is actually where the unit price is going to be. So what I'm going to do is go reference, item properties, and pick unit price. So basically item properties is all the columns in my list. So I'm going to grab the unit price. I'm going to go add. The next thing was C5. C5 was the quantity. Okay, so that's that. And I've got 2 more to go, so it must be C6, which was the location. And you can see it's pretty quick to build these up. You can see even with 4 values to put in, which would be quite typical, it doesn't take very long. It's just a nice form to fill in, 1 step at a time. And then finally, we've got the product. Okay, so that's passing the values in. I then want to retrieve some answers back out. So those 2 cells, if I double check again, they were C18 and C19. So the way I express that I want to output those 2, because it's a range, I use a colon, so it's C18, C19. Okay, so those are the 2 values that we're outputting. What I'll need to do, because there's multiple values there, is I need to store those in a collection variable. Whenever you find yourself in a situation where you're trying to capture multiple values rather than just a single, you really need to use a collection. It's the only type of variable here that can store multiple values correctly. So a collection is the way forward for multiple values, even if it's just 2 or 2000. So within here, I'm going to call this all results. For me, I use the word all whenever I'm dealing with a collection. Other people like to prefix with COL or some other prefix, but I like to use the word all. I think the main thing is back at work that you and whoever else within your company are building workflows, you're working consistently. So try and decide on a standard for things like your collection prefixes and try and stick to them as best you can. It will make life easier in the long run. Even if there's just a team of 1 of you at the minute, try and think about maybe you'll get an assistant at some point. We can all dream, right? Okay, so you can see rather than someone going to the spreadsheet and typing these values in every time, it's going to take the values from the list within SharePoint. It's going to pass the values into here for me, and then it's going to output these 2 results, which is really the things we're after. Okay, so that's kind of neat. So one of the cool things we can do here is we can check if everything's healthy so far. So you get to do this with all of the more advanced actions. So this is definitely one of the more advanced ones. You get this Run Now button. This is something that was not available in the original versions of Nintex. It was added as a popular request. So the first thing I can do is test the connection. That checks my username and password and just kind of does very basic checks of the details at the top. So you can see here it says OK. So that's telling me it's happy with the basic details at the top. What I want to do though is actually just check and test this out properly. So what I'm going to do here is you see these cell values. At the moment that's hooked into the columns within my SharePoint list. So what I'm going to do is swap those out for static values. So I've got a pre-tested idea of what I think should happen. So I think if it's 200, 100, USA and hat, I tested earlier on in the spreadsheet and I know it should say acceptable and 1,945. So if I do the testing here, what I'm basically doing is proving that this is working the same way from here as it is when people go directly to the spreadsheet. So that's going to be important, right? You don't want your workflow to suddenly be changing the figures all of a sudden. So it's going through. So again, I'd made a note when I tested it from the spreadsheet before the session, acceptable and 1945. So that's a really simple way I can test it. And actually I can come in and I could have other values that I've tested with. And hopefully I see by changing the figures there, it's changing potentially the wording if I change this significantly enough. You can see how easy that is to test with. What I've just done there, you see that's great, isn't it? So fast. What I've just done there is tested that action to the point where I'm completely satisfied that this is going to work. There's very little now that could stop that working. He says, knowing there are still things that could go wrong. So this has probably just saved me about half an hour, just going into Run Now and testing this one little bit, rather than testing an entire workflow and then spending often more than half an hour trying to troubleshoot. So test small by using things like Run Now. It'll definitely save you time in the long run, so that's a definite good advice. Also, if there had been something that was wrong in here, like the sheet name, let's say during this testing we found it was actually sheet 3, not sheet 1. When you change things in here and you get it working, notice, so that's sheet 3 at the minute, notice that when you press close and come back into here, it doesn't update the underlying action. So you'd need to make sure that any fixes you'd applied in the testing window, the Run Now window, you need to manually apply those back here as well. So you get this with things like execute SQL, query LDAP, all of the more complicated actions, particularly the ones that connect to external systems like this going out to an Excel spreadsheet away from SharePoint. So yeah, really very, very useful to be able to do that. So before we go any further, I know actually from testing this morning that there is something that's not perfect at this point. So one of the fields here is called unit price. So unit price actually in my SharePoint list is a currency format. So what that means is when it passes it in, it's going to have a pound symbol because of the way I've set this up for English, and then it's going to say 700. When we pass in pound 700, it actually gets passed into here as a word rather than a number, and it causes problems. So that's quite a normal thing. When you pass data between different systems, sometimes things that are dates or currency can get passed as text. They get misunderstood. The good news is, although that's a problem that developers normally have to deal with, because we're working very much like developers in Nintex, we actually get the tools that developers get to fix those problems. So what I'm going to do here, having identified that problem earlier, is I'm going to fix it before the problem actually happens. I think it's an interesting one just to point out in the session. So if you're passing things around that are dates or currency and you're getting some strange results coming back, check the conversions. Have a look, see if they're coming back as text, because it might be causing your problems. The reason it's kind of hard to troubleshoot that is it doesn't cause an error. You just get some kind of strange results. You get zeros or something along those lines rather than an error message. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do something that I think is quite interesting. I'm going to clean up the information and tell it to effectively be a number rather than text. So there's a special action called convert value which does this exact thing. We have the same sort of actions to convert the other way as well. So for now I'm converting from text down to a number. The way I'm going to do it for this specific example is I'm going to use something called replace. So there's a function called replace. It's going to allow me to trim the pound symbol or whatever the currency is off the front of my data. So it's actually a pretty simple process. This window here helps me build it. I think it's a good example of how nice the interface is and how thorough the options are that you get. Okay, so when we get these little problems, we can fix it pretty quick. So what I'm looking for is unit price. That's the only one that's currency. That's the one that causes me the trouble. So I tell it I'm looking for a pound symbol. I tell it to replace it with blank. Okay, so I'm cleaning up my data. I then need to store the results in a variable. So I'm going to go and make another variable. So this one's going to be called clean unit price. And this one I'm going to put in as a number. So that's taken unit price, which has been filled in SharePoint, removed the pound symbol and dropped it into a number. And again, the only action that can do that is this convert value action. This is for taking text and dates, for taking text and making them either to dates or to numbers. So very nice thing to know about. When we first had Nintex Workflow 2007, like version 1 of it, that was missing. And again, it was very much added very quickly by popular demand. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I want to prove that that's working so far, okay, because people are obviously excited to see what that looks like. So I'm going to go in and switch on a few things that are going to help me prove that this is healthy and working so far before I build anything else. So I'm going to go into workflow settings. I'm going to tell it to start workflows when items are created. I'm going to tell it to start workflows when items are edited. So this is activity in my SharePoint list that will run this business process. I'm also going to enable something called verbose logging. Quite often people kind of ask me, how do we get this thing? They don't see it in their environment. The reason you don't see it in your environment is by default it's switched off. The idea and the reason you should have this switched on, although it's not on by default, is that it gives you reporting. So those of you that are developers and you're used to debug and local windows and watch windows, or if you're a non-developer and you just want to know what's going on behind the scenes to fix some problems or to do some thorough testing, so you switch this on. So it has to be switched on first of all in SharePoint Central Administration under Nintex Global Settings. So you switch on verbose logging, and that means it will be available here. So it allows you to test workflows more thoroughly and also troubleshoot very quickly and easily. Without that, troubleshooting is very long-winded. So this is how you troubleshoot and how you debug. So we'll show you the end result of that in a moment. Another little noteworthy option here is publish without validation. What that means is every time I press publish, which is what I'm about to do now, every time I press publish, the workflow will be passed from Nintex over to SharePoint. SharePoint actually is going to run the workflow. The bit that publishing without validation does is it means we tell SharePoint not to proofread the workflow. We tell SharePoint just to accept the workflow and take it as it is. So there's no proofreading, and that means rather than a publish taking a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, publishing takes a few seconds generally. So it saves me a lot of time. So whenever I'm demoing, testing, I'm always going to tick publish without validation. It will save me probably 5 minutes just within this demo today. Okay, so I'm going to call this, I'm going to call it Excel calculations. I should really fill in the description. Basically, the description is when people are manually running the workflow. So I could put do not run manually. Yeah. The change comments is for me as a developer, so I can keep track of the different versions of the workflow. As I change it, I should keep track of those changes in here. It is possible using the open button, so it just says open, to revert back to previous versions if I ever need to. So, exciting times. This is where I cross my fingers and we give it a try. I've done lots of checks, haven't I, as we've gone through. So hopefully, because of all those checks, we're in a pretty positive position and the thing should work first time, he says. Let's give it a try. So we filled in the basic details, the same as I'd actually typed in on the Excel spreadsheet. So if I go save, so that's a good sign. Over here, it comes up with the name of the workflow. It's what's called a workflow status column, and it tells me it's in progress. If I refresh the page, give it a few seconds, we can see it says completed. You might be disappointed to see that it's not brought the results up on the page. The reason it's not brought the results up is I've not built that part of the workflow yet. I've told it to pass the values in, calculate the answer, and then store the answer in two variables, or sorry, one collection variable. I've never told it to write back to here yet. So to actually work out if that's working properly, I'm going to click on the three ellipses, these three dots. I'm going to go into View Workflow History, and I'm going to go into Excel Calcs, should be Calcs really, which is the name of my workflow. Remember, for those of you that are kind of new to Nintex at the minute, we are recording this, so you will be able to watch it back again afterwards. We're going at a decent pace to try and fit in lots of top tips for you. And again, the questions, I see there's like 10 questions already. We are going to come to those towards the end of the session, so don't worry if you've posted and we've not answered yet. Okay, so let's have a look at this convert value. If I click on that, it tells me that before the action ran, the value was 0. It tells me now the action ran, the value is 200. So that's a pretty good sign. We see that in there. If I click on the Query Excel Services, we can see that actually before Query Excel Services ran, the collection was empty. Now it contains the word acceptable, which is what I expected, and the word value. I wanted the number 1945. What I've done, I'll pretend I've done it on purpose, if you'll believe that, is I've actually created the process to clean up my data, but I never actually then put it into the workflow. So let me go back one step. It's a good job I tested that there. So having identified a problem, all I need to do is head back into the workflow. It's ever so easy, ever so quick to change it. Whoa. I'm in the right library. Let's try again. Okay, so it's ever so easy to change it. In my Query Excel Services, what I failed to do in my rush to test it in all the excitement was I failed to put the clean unit price in here. I'm still using the one with the pound symbol in front, and you can see the effect of that was this hash value. So let's put the clean one in. effectively I've proved that problem exists, and then I'm just going to publish that without any other changes. And again, I'm a big fan of, if it doesn't work, make one change, test it again. So I guess to be fair, what I'll do is I'll go in and just make a small change to this one. So let's go 101, so it's the same data, just a slight variation on the quantity. You can see there, that's the one with the pound symbol in front of it. That's the one that's giving me the grief. So if I refresh that, completed, that's good, nice and fast. Head back into check, and hopefully we'll see the data looks a bit more like we expected now. So let's have a look. So sure enough, you can see acceptable, and you can see this numbers come through. So before it was a value, it wasn't right, it wasn't resolving. So I've not only trimmed off the pound symbol now, I'm now passing the clean data into the Excel spreadsheet. So things like that can take quite a bit of troubleshooting, but by ruling out lots of things, I was able to kind of pretty quickly work out what was going on. Some of that will come with experience. You know, I've built hundreds of these workflows, probably thousands now over the years, but actually a lot of it you can pick up just by being careful and ruling out the obvious things. Okay, so let's finish this workflow off. This is going to be an easy finish. What I want to do is basically write the information back to these two columns. So this should be the easy bit. We've got past the hardest bit of the demo now already, so we can all breathe a little bit easier. So if I head back into here, to write the information back into the list, what I'm going to use is from the libraries and list category. I scroll down, down, down. We've got something called update item. So this can actually take values such as variables, but not exclusively variables. It could be other things as well. And it can write them back to any list or library within the current SharePoint site. So I can actually do some calculations over here, and then based on that, put update an entry in a calendar or a task in a task list. So there's a lot of potential for this. This is a very powerful thing. So before I can actually send the data from my Excel results up into my SharePoint list, what I need to do first is just separate the data out into two separate variables. At the moment, I've got a collection with two values in, and that's not really compatible with the action that I'm going to use. So I need to take the data from my collection and break it down into two separate variables. I know I need to do that from experience, so let me go ahead and show you that. So let me just check what I'm going to call these two things. So one of them is going to be called price above low, and that's a text field, so a text variable. So this is the price that I'm trying to sell at above the lowest recent price. Okay, so that's like a good health check in sales. Is this at least above the lowest sale we've taken for this product so far? So so that's the first one. I'm also going to create a second one, which was estimated profit, and that one's actually a number. Okay, so that was how much profit. It was £1,000, £400. So we've got a good variety of data types, so that's nice. To actually break the information out of the collection into those two variables that I just created, from the operations category, we're going to use something called collection operation. So a lot of people don't understand what this does. Okay, so in a lot of situations, you'll find you end up with a collection with multiple values in. Okay, so you've got multiple names, multiple email addresses, or in my case, multiple pieces of information from the spreadsheet. So you want to be able to then work with those individual values rather than the whole collection, or in my case, I do. So the collection operations, one of the many things it can do is it can allow me to take the collection and it can pop, which basically means move, one of the variables from the collection into, one of the values from the collection into a variable. So the bottom item in my collection is the estimated profit. So by saying from the all results collection, which effectively is two values at the moment, I can pop the bottom value from the collection into estimated profit. When I do that, the collection gets one value smaller. Okay, so that's how that works. If you're interested, what I'd say is, or if you're interested in these other things here, what I'd say is after the session today, which finishes in about half an hour, what you might want to do is just go in, pretend you're building a workflow, drag this action in and press the help button. The help button in these actions actually tells you what all these things do. They don't give you real examples, but they describe what these things are designed to do. Okay, so it's nice to have those. I'm actually going to copy the first collection and then just update it to use the other variable, which was price above low. Okay, So by copying it, I was able to then just make the small change that I needed rather than reconfiguring the whole action. So again, these are nice things to know about. A lot of people kind of struggle, how do we get the data, how do we move it around? So with this one demonstration, within the first 25 minutes, we've covered off a whole load of those good tips. Okay, final then, hopefully again an easy part. What I want to do now is update the existing item. The values that I wish to update are the estimated profit and the, which one was it? Estimated profit and above recent low. Okay, can't see it for looking. So these are the two values that I wish to update back in my list. And again here it's showing me all of the columns that were available from that list. So all the custom columns, they're all there. So the profit estimate is coming from workflow data, estimated profit. Workflow data is the phrase they're using to describe the variables. So any variables you'll find available in your workflow data heading. The same down here, workflow data, and it was this price above low. So again, I'm using the variables to pass information around. So the query Excel services action output one variable with two values in. I then use collection operations to separate the two variables, and then I'm using update item to write the values back to the list. One of the big strengths here with Nintex workflow is there's over 150 of these building blocks. So my workflow actually, all said and done, is using 4 different building blocks. So if you can imagine the variety of things we can achieve with 150. 150, to be honest, is not the limit. As soon as you use Nintex Live, which is an extension of Nintex workflow, I think now you actually get over the 200 workflow actions, 200 workflow components. So it's quite an impressive figure that we're up to now. So I'm going to drop back out of there, and I'm going to just try it once more. So I just want to see that working. So there shouldn't be any big surprises. So if I make again a small change, so maybe if I just update the unit price to 201. The first time the workflow runs after publishing the changes, it's always a little bit sluggish. Basically what's happening behind the scenes is the workflow is being compiled. So I'm just going to refresh a couple of times, and it's completed, and it says 2,100 and accepted. I'm going to add one more item just to prove that it's not a fluke and that it is behaving, because you know sometimes you can get the right answer as a fluke. So let's say jumper, we're going to send it to the US, which is an expensive shipping cost. We're only going to have one. We're going to sell it at 3, which is a really cheap price. So if I go ahead then and save that, and again a quick refresh, so we see sure enough we're going to make a loss at that. It's too cheap, so that price is cheaper than anyone else has ever sold it at before. So if I've been able to achieve that in 20 minutes with all that talking, you can imagine as soon as you have skilled up on this and you've had a little practice with it, which as you can see doesn't take long, you could have maybe 7 or 8 different spreadsheets that the workflow talks to, passing all sorts of data around and then coming back with all sorts of insights that normally would have been, in my case, very frustrating to find. For me, having to go into 5 different spreadsheets, type the same values several times, there's a whole load of processes in companies where I've worked. So it's great now to be able to streamline and automate this stuff. So hopefully that on its own was worth sort of signing in for. The good news is I've got a whole load more things that I want to show you. Okay, so the next scenario that we're going to go through is BCS. So this again is a bit of a hot topic, and it's something that I think there's a bit of mystery around. So the idea is, behind the scenes, a lot of us have not only SharePoint but also lots of other business systems. So one way that we can gain data from other business systems is using SharePoint BCS, which in this version is called Business Connectivity Services. And we've had equivalents of this going back into SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint 2007 as well. So in 2007 it had a different name, the Business Data Catalog, but it's the same basic idea. It's a process within SharePoint for connecting and, in our case, reading external data. We're going to do a read. That's what we're going to do. So for this to work, what I'm about to do, for this to work, you need SharePoint BCS to be configured in your SharePoint environment and working. So that's the first thing to check. You need a data source. In my example, I'm going to use a SQL server. What it's going to represent in my demo is a warehousing system. So that's what it's representing, and it's got all of the stock. So it tells me how many hats, how many coats. tells me what's available now as of this second that I can ship out and I can send to my customers. So that's what I'm going to do. Also behind the scenes, I've used SharePoint Designer. If I flick to it, I've used SharePoint Designer to establish a relationship between my external my external SQL database, my warehousing database, and SharePoint. So this might be something that you're familiar with already. So if you're happy with creating external content types, you can create those and then use them within Nintex Workflow Query BCS, which is the action we'll use. If you're not familiar with external content types, it's definitely worth, when you get back to work, kind of talking to people in your organization and finding out if there is someone that creates these objects already. If there is, you could talk to them and they can help you get started, or they can make these objects for you. One of the things that often happens in SharePoint is there's kind of two levels of work. There's the front end and the back end. If we imagine Nintex is like a front end, it's a graphical interface, there's no programming involved. This stuff, the external content types and configuring BCS, in a lot of companies would be considered back end. So it might be that you have to talk to someone nicely and they will set these bits up for you. In the front end, you will then be able to make use of them. So there's kind of two parts to that story. And again, hopefully you'll be lucky like me and you'll be allowed to do both. It'd be even better if you got someone around that can do it for you, though, so that would be kind of cool as well. So I have mine created already. Also, just as a final note of what's set up on my environment, I'm using what's often called single sign-on. This actually deals with the security. So you know, when my workflow is running and it's talking to this external database, it has to do that in a secure way. So in SharePoint, there's this process, single sign-on, which allows us to deal with security. So again, if you were looking for the full reading list of what do I need to go and research to make this happen, these are the components. For a lot of you, you'll find that kind of all these things at the bottom are done already, and you're just going to be able to come in and Nintex Workflow right on the top of it. So at least you're aware of the components. A final mention before I build this one out for you is again, what we're about to do is a Nintex Enterprise Edition feature. So this is a luxury feature available only in the Enterprise Edition, okay? So, right, again, I'm sure you're pretty excited to see this work. So what it boils down to is, behind the scenes, I've got a database. I can actually show you. I didn't show the guys this morning, but I can show you now. I've remembered. You can see here, look, very small database over in a separate server, physically a separate server, and you can see here it's got a few products and a few quantities. I'm doing it on a small scale, but this works exactly the same with thousands or maybe even tens of thousands of items. You know, as long as you've got the queries right, this stuff scales up really well. So what I'm going to do is make it so that this same workflow takes the product name, and it's going to check the stock availability. So it's going to be another consideration, right, when someone's placing an order. It might be great that there's going to be loads of profit, but if we can't fulfill the order, that might control how we deal with the process, how we delay the customer slightly, perhaps. I'm sure there's a professional term for delaying the customer. I just don't know what that is. Okay, so where are the components that make this work? If I take a look in the integration category, what I'm looking for is something called Query BCS. So I'm going to put this quite high up in the process, perhaps. As soon as I've finished my Excel stuff, I'm then going to go for a Query BCS. Okay. I can move these things around a bit later on, but I'm putting this quite high up because it's something that I want to do early on in the process. So this actually looks to me a little bit similar to the Excel action that we've just seen. And actually it looks pretty similar to most of the Nintex actions that you will see ever. So once you're good at one, it pretty much means you're kind of halfway there with a lot of the others. So what I'm going to do is first of all put in a user that has access to this other database. So if I write the correct password, that would help. There we go. I'm going to select the data. So behind the scenes, I created this thing called product DB. This is an object which the BCS, the Business Connectivity Services System, is making available to me. The cool thing here is, I don't know if that's SQL or Oracle or some other crazy system that I've never heard of. The idea here at BCS is it completely separates me from all that technical stuff. Okay, so I don't have to deal with that, which is great. Which again is what you're getting with the enterprise tools. You don't have to deal with the technical stuff. Hopefully in your organization, again, someone else would have done the underlying stuff already. The next thing I need is what's called in here the entity name. So In our particular example, I've created an entity in BCS that's called stock. So that actually has all the information in that I need. What I want to retrieve from the stock table is the quantity value. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in. If I was to run this right now, what I'd get is the quantities of all of the products. And I don't want that. I don't want to know how many hats, how many coats, how many jumpers. I just want to know for the item that I've filled in on my form in SharePoint, how many are in stock. Okay, so that's where there's a filter button here. So I go add filter. Again, the filter is an object that's been made in the underlying BCS. Okay, so the filter is the object that was made in the underlying BCS. So in here, my filter is called filter. And what I'm going to do is pass in the name of the product from the form I filled in. So I'm going to go into here, and there's the product name. That's the one I'm after. So I'm passing that value in as a filter, so it's only going to return the quantity for the product that I'm interested in. So that kind of might have looked a bit technical. I guess the thing that looks difficult, if anything does, is knowing these values. So again, if you were not the person creating the BCS objects, the person that created those objects would need to tell you that word and that word. Everything else you can do. Yeah, you know, it's not horrible with brackets and speech marks and quotes and programming. So again, the idea is the difficult bit's already been done. Someone's made the BCS objects, and then you can go ahead and you can just create these. One question I've just seen go past on the questions windows very quickly was, can we just connect straight to the SQL database? Yes, you could connect straight to the SQL database as well. So there is an action called execute SQL, and that allows you to read, write, update, run stored procedures. So you can go straight to the SQL database as well if you don't have BCS. But again, BCS is hopefully from an end user point of view making this process easier. Also what it's doing is someone that's dealing with managing the underlying data of our business systems can give you access to the data without having to give you access to the systems. One of the big bugbears in a lot of companies, if you've got a lot of power and authority, it tends to mean you've got about 20 passwords to get into all these different systems to look at different things. So the idea here is that I can give you access to the underlying data using BCS, and you can then use that data to make good business decisions almost automatically thanks to these workflows. So there's a lot of really nice things going on there. So right, I'm wary of time. I'm going to do a quick run now just to make sure everything's healthy. So as with when I ran now for my my earlier example, I need to swap out any placeholders like field names for real values. So that looks pretty good. So hats 3. I can't remember which one had different values. Hopefully this is not 3. There we go. Okay, perfect, perfect. Very good habit to get into, just those little tests. I need to store the results in a variable. So I don't have a variable for that yet, do I? So let's go make a new one. I'm going to call this stock. It's a number. I know it's a number because it's going to be output to a number field. That's how I know it's a number. What I'm going to do then is in the update action, I'm going to get it to also update that value as well. So it was stock available, and that again was workflow data stock. So I'm using that same action. There's no point doing another update. Might as well just use that one as well. Let's go ahead and test that out really quick. So one of the things whilst we're just waiting for this to happen, what I will say is even though we're covering lots of information in this 1 hour, for everything I'm telling you, there's probably like 100 other things that we've not got time to do today. This Nintex workflow is a very big product. In my mind, it's kind of like an Excel spreadsheet. You know, you can use it and not really know much and just get along, but actually as you dig deeper, you continue to discover things as you use it for years and years. So that's the experience I've had, even having used the 2007 version in massive detail with lots of partners. As we've moved into the newer versions, it probably took me over a year before I'd kind of discovered all the good bits that I now rely on every day. So hopefully with these webinars and the training sessions, you're getting a good head start, and it's kind of helping you work efficiently. So you can see that, look, that's come in as a 3 for that stock item. So the end user doesn't need to know it's a workflow. We could actually hide this column here. All you would say to them is, guys, you don't have to go into the spreadsheet and connect to the data warehousing system anymore, and they hopefully will think that's pretty amazing. Okay? So again, within, what was that, kind of 40 odd minutes, we've been able to create a business process working with data from 2 systems. We're not quite done yet. I've got a couple of other thoughts on this. We're pretty much there with the tips and tricks, but there's a couple of other things we can just squeeze in the last sort of 5 minutes before we jump to the questions and answers. So one of the things that we've not really illustrated much in here is the use of logic and flow. So one of the things that's pretty great about Nintex workflow is it had lots of tools to deal with logic and flow. So at the moment, we're just writing this information to a list. So I think just that on its own is pretty useful. One of the things we might want to do, though, is based on whether that item is profitable or not, we might want to start contacting people like a manager to actually look at moving forward with this pricing and actually getting a contract written up or an order placed. So what I could do is say, I'm going to use a run if. I'm going to check the estimated profit, and what I might do is check to see if the estimated profit is greater than 0. If the estimated profit is greater than 0, what I might want to do is enter into a conversation with my manager to find out if they're happy for me to go ahead with the order and contact the customer based on the values that we currently have. Okay, so the run if here is basically checking to see if there's a profit involved. If there is a profit involved, then we're going ahead to have a discussion with our manager. As long as your manager is filled in Active Directory, what you'll find is you can actually get the manager as a value. So that's going to be dynamically looked up in Active Directory without any hassle. It's great. So can I So again, you could word this however you want. Mine's very informal. The sort of thing that would help the manager make a decision, I guess, would be knowing what's going on. So what we could do is tell them the product and the estimated profit, and also it might be useful to tell them the quantity and then the stock available, because these are things that are going to perhaps help them make a decision. You can see how easy that is for me to do, right? Just pulling all this stuff in, it's so nice. And again, mine's very informal with what I've built there, but you can see that process. And again, that flexi-task action is very powerful. So the way it might work in here, if it's approved, there might be an email that comes back to me to say get on with it, just sell it, that's what you're there to do. So I could do that. If it's rejected, it might well be that, again, I get a bad news email telling me that it's been rejected, and then it might be up to me to pick up the phone and talk to the customer and tell them, yeah, that offer that we were working on, unless we increase the price a bit, we can't do it, or unless we increase the quantity a bit. And again, those are things that they could put into the system and see what the results come out as. So you can see how quickly we can build this business logic into the system. As the workflow gets bigger, you can zoom out. So again, there's loads of nice things going on. One more thought with this, and then I promise we are going to stop for some questions because I've done a lot of talking in this session already. Final thought for this is that we can also go through and we could connect with Microsoft CRM. So it's another key point of integration. So this only applies for Microsoft CRM. So we do have integration to work with other systems using protocols such as web services and execute SQL. But what we're about to do is only for CRM. So I'm just going to show you the basic component. What I'm thinking is, let me get rid of that from there, move it a bit further down. What I'm thinking is, down here, before we go ahead and have an approval, what we should probably do is check how healthy the customer's credit limit is. So if your customer is listed in CRM, one of the fields that you have in there is effectively the credit limit. So that might be used in a lot of companies to say, for this particular customer, how big an order are we happy for them to place? Can they place £1 million, £2 million, £3,000? So what we could do is we could query for the customer, assuming we added an extra column into SharePoint for the customer name to be entered. What we could then do is we could include that as well. So we could actually tell the person making the decision the order is for £6,000, the customer's credit limit is actually at the moment only £3,000. And that could also be flagged up, and it might actually be that if we find the customer's credit limit is lower than the order they're trying to place, that could be something we want to catch. So what we might do is add another decision and that again might be sort of at the discretion of the manager. It might be that if there's a credit problem, we say no, we're not happy at all. So we might end up kind of somewhere like this, and you can see again how quickly we can work through that process. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some pretty good insight. One of the big things that people ask is how quickly can we build workflows with Nintex? So hopefully this definitely answers that question. People ask us all the time, how easily can we integrate with other systems? I think probably the challenge for a lot of people is just understanding their other systems more than building the workflows. So if you already know about BCS, Excel spreadsheets, if you're good with those things, it's not a big step then with Nintex Enterprise to actually go ahead and start building this type of workflow. There's not a massive knowledge gap to do that. Okay. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to switch over to a quick summary of the tips, and then we're going to go through a couple of slides and the questions and answers. So let me just switch over. There we go. So the tips that we've got, one of the things I would say is make sure you build your SharePoint objects and then your workflow. So get your BCS set up, get your Excel spreadsheets uploaded to your libraries. A lot of people, when they phone us or email us with support type questions, a lot of the questions actually, when we trace them back, are caused by inconsistencies or incorrect configuration within SharePoint. So if your BCS, your Excel services and these other components, your libraries, your views, if that's all healthy, then the workflows will sit on top of that and be healthy as well. If you have any problems in those underlying components, they will of course be passed through to the workflows. So when you're testing things, always bear that in mind. Always look for the obvious things as well, spelling mistakes, things being switched off. Normally 9 times out of 10 there'll be easy solutions to even what look like disastrous problems. When we're looking to save time, always publish without validation. Again, I'm sure that saved me probably 4 or 5 minutes today. That was just settings, tick the box to say publish without validation. Very useful. You can use open to open previous versions of a workflow. One of the things I didn't stress much in this session, but it's very important, save all the time. If I would have lost my workflow, I would have been devastated at having to start again, and you will be the same. So keep saving all the time. Anything you've saved, you can press open and get back to those save points. There's no undo button, so save all the time. When you're debugging, use the execute button in those advanced actions. It's not available everywhere, but where it is, use execute. You need to replace any placeholder values like column names for specific values like product names or amounts of money, and then run, and you'll see the results right there. It's fantastic. Definitely spend some time getting to know the actions. If you just use the same 5 actions over and over again, you are not getting the product that you paid for. As we said with live, combined with workflow, I think we're at now over 200 actions. So if you find yourself using the same 4 every day, you are not doing it right. There must be more to it than that. Make sure you keep thinking about reusing workflows. So again, in the session we didn't have much time for that, but saving a workflow and exporting it allows you to use it again on another server or in a different library. Also, saving a workflow as a template is an easy way of allowing other people to use it. And again, for everything we've talked about today, there are 100 other things we did not talk about, but this product is really prolific. So it's a very mature product. We're in our 3rd major version, or our 3rd version of SharePoint that we have the product in. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the practical side of things. We've got a brief glance at the more information slide. Shruti, do you want to just briefly explain what we've got here?
Sure. So before we move into the Q&A segment, if you'd like to get more information on Enterprise Edition, there are a number of places you can turn to, and not least of which is the shorthand URL that we put together. It's ntx.lv/NW Enterprise. I'll keep this page up in case you want to jot it down. This is a flyer in a PDF format, and it highlights several other scenarios on how Enterprise Edition is being used across departments and several organizations. So that's a good resource. I do see in the question window that there are a lot of questions around where we can find past webinar recordings, and if I'd like to share this webinar with my other colleagues in the company, where do I look up for it? So again, www.nintex.com is a one-stop shop to go and find out everything about the company, our other products, customer success stories, as well as past webinar recordings. We'll make them available on nintex.com/pastwebinars, or you can also go to our YouTube channel and look for the recording, which will be made available in about a week's time. If you have an idea on a topic of interest for a webinar that you would like us to present, we'd be more than happy to do that and receive your suggestions for the same. Please go ahead and submit a topic of your preference at nintex.com/suggestwebinar. And there was one more question around wanting to learn more about the provisioning actions. In fact, there is a webinar that I recently presented with Mike Fitzmaurice, who's the VP Product Technology at Nintex. And the webinar is titled Nintex Workflow Enterprise Edition, What, Why, and How. And that webinar covers a lot of interesting examples, just like the way Rob presented, around employee life cycle, onboarding, provisioning, document assembly, presence-based routing, and process improvement. So I think that'd be another very good resource for you guys to refer to and learn more about Enterprise Edition. And with that, we can jump into questions, Rob.
Great. Okay. What I'll do is I'll put our contact details up on the screen as well, whilst we just read through some of these questions. I know we've got a lot of questions here, so I think I'll just start at the top with the ones that came in first, if that's okay, and I'll work my way through. So let's take a quick look. So one of the first questions says that we mentioned that we can integrate with a lot of different applications. Is there any integration with Maximo or SAP? So there's not any specific integration with SAP or Maximo at the moment. So the way you would integrate with those is if they were database products, you can use the execute SQL to go straight to the back end if you're allowed to do that. The other way that you would work with a lot of those larger business systems is through web services. So we have an excellent execute web service action, or call web service action it's actually called. So wherever you've got a web service, you can actually send commands to those web services and read information from those web services using that call web service action, which is part of the integration category. So that's the way that would work. There was a general question, does everything we looked at apply to 2010? And yes, it does. Pretty much everything we did there was available in 2010. Okay, so even the fancy stuff with the Excel, yep, we could do that in 2010 as well. Just to confirm that the things that we focused on today were Enterprise Edition. So there's a few people saying, which bits of this can we do with Standard Edition? So the enterprise-specific stuff we looked at today was right at the end, the CRM query action. A bit earlier on, the query BCS action, so that's enterprise only, and also the query Excel services, that was enterprise only. The whole product in terms of the interface, building the workflows, all of that is available in Standard. So you know how quickly I dragged into the design area, you know, publish without validation, all the variables, the decision making like run if and loop, the user interaction like send an email, ask a question, all of that stuff's available in the Standard Edition as well. Okay, so it's kind of a series of these specific actions, and also some of the reporting tools in particular. Those are the big benefits we get from Enterprise. There's a general question, and it's getting more specific, so I'll just cover these briefly. Will it work with a spreadsheet from a trusted file location? A trusted file location. I think trusted file locations are normally within SharePoint, so I guess I'm not sure is the answer to that. So it's basically using the Excel services system behind the scenes. So I would expect if you can work with Excel spreadsheets in trusted file locations, and that works for your normal Excel services, I suspect it's going to work with Nintex Workflow as well. Basically what Nintex Workflow is doing very well is making use of the underlying SharePoint technology. It's making it accessible to us without being developers. There's a general question, what rights does Alex need to have on the spreadsheet? So I think in this particular case, Alex needed to be able to read the spreadsheet. The actual spreadsheet itself doesn't get written back to. The spreadsheet opens and then closes. It doesn't actually calculate. So we'd have to double check that, but I believe it's a read. Just having a quick look through. Okay, there's a few duplicate questions. I'm just cleaning this up a little bit. There's a question that came up this morning, and to be honest, I'm not sure what the answer is. So the question is, can named ranges be used instead of cell numbers? I'm not sure, to be honest. I see what you're saying. It would be good if we can, but I'd have to check that. I'm not sure if we can use named ranges. Yeah, so 2 people asking that. 3 people asking that. There's a general question, are there locking issues to deal with when multiple people are connecting? As far as I know, it's not an issue. So we've seen this working in production and touch wood, not had problems with it. So as far as I know, there's not any issues with concurrency. I assume it's, again, because it's Excel services, I assume it's dealing with it the same way as multiple user editing. So, you know, normally you can have maybe 10 people in an Excel spreadsheet at the same time. So I assume it's using that same technology to avoid conflicts. And again, the fact that it doesn't save the results, I guess, is helping us as well. Someone's mentioning that they've switched off the verbose login to avoid extra data. Let me just read the second part of that. I'm not sure what that question's asking. I'll tell you what, I'll cover what I think it's asking. So when you do switch on verbose logging, it will mean that you are capturing more information, and your Nintex SQL database where the history is stored will be larger. So, yeah, if you do switch on the verbose logging, that history database will get larger. The only thing you can do as a compromise is you can switch on verbose logging, and you can actually set it in SharePoint Central Admin to only keep the logs for 1 day. The general question about purging data, can we purge the verbose logging only? No, not as far as I know, but I'll make a note of that because that's good feedback. There is options to purge old data or orphan data, but not to purge just the logs. I think what we might have to do is take some of these offline because a lot of these are very specific, and some of them are sort of asking for numbers and times. So I think probably the best thing to do is the rest of the questions that are left there, we'll make a note of those, and I think as part of the system when you logged in, people provided email addresses. So I think we'll have to come back to those last few that are left. That's okay?
And they can also feel free to reach out to us on the email addresses that you're seeing up on the screen.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If you have any other question, please feel free to email us directly, and we'd be happy to either direct you to the person who has the answers or get back to you ourselves.
Perfect. And again, as they can see from the session, we're both quite passionate about the work we do. So whether it's whether you're having an issue with sort of buying the product and working out which version you need, or whether you're trying to use it and you need some training to get the most out of the product you've bought already, we're here to help. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for your time.
Great. I think we're done here. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Rob, for such great demo. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll catch you at our next webinar.